Welcome to Concerning the Spiritual and Art, a podcast exploring spirituality, consciousness, and the creative process. I'm your host, Martin Benson. All right, y'all. Welcome back to the podcast. Today I have artist Dan Huston on, and we had just a really special conversation about drawing, everything drawing, because that's what he does. He's so committed to the medium, and he's so unbelievably spectacular at executing these drawings that he does. We talk a lot about sort of how he began drawing, like where that sort of interest came, and also about like his studio practice, where his imagery comes from, relating to kind of these microcosmic scales of life and natural forms, and how he kind of plays off of those sort of ideas of biology and biological systems, and then how like the drawings kind of evolved and where they become self-referential. So instead of kind of referring to these sort of biological images or microbiological images, he's referring to himself and sort of creating this ever evolving language within his drawing. We talk a lot about sort of his way he limits sort of some of the parameters around his drawings, how he works with one pad of paper and he finishes a whole series of drawings by getting through that entire pad. Just so many interesting things and components to his practice that for me as an artist are really inspiring to hear. He's definitely very devoted to what he does, and he's executing it at such a high level. And we just had a really amazing discussion about the all things that sort of related to his practice, and sort of also about flow states too, and the importance of those, and like other places in life where we might be able to experience similar flow states like we experience in the studio as artists. And it was just a really awesome conversation. I think you're going to really not only enjoy hearing Dan speak about his work, but you're going to love seeing these drawings if you're not familiar with the kind of work that he does. So here you go, Dan Huston. Hey, y'all, I'm going to cut in here real quick for all my YouTube viewers out there, just to remind you that the podcast also exists on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and any major podcast platform. So if you're enjoying what you're seeing here on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe on one of those platforms as well, so you can take the show with you on the go and never really miss an episode. Also, I wanted to let you know that I'm now offering subscriptions on my Instagram page at Martin L. Benson for 99 cents a month. That's less than $12 a year, which that funding will go toward helping produce the show. So I can continue to evolve the podcast, continue to create great content. So if you support what I'm doing here and are enjoying all this content here on YouTube, consider not only subscribing on the podcast platforms, but also subscribing on Instagram for that 99 cents a month so that I can continue on this path. So thank you all. Now back to the show. Peace. All right, Dan, welcome to the podcast. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad to connect. We were supposed to record last week, y'all, and then I was just feeling really dragged down at the end of the week, and Dan graciously was like, no problem, like we can reschedule, and we got right back on the schedule real quick.
Yeah.
And I'm super excited to connect with you. I came across your work pretty recently, actually, like maybe some months ago, and I immediately, just looking at your feed on Instagram, I'm like, boom, like blown away by the aesthetic that you have and the way that you handle the drawing material. But something that's so interesting for me to like think about, and I'm curious to hear from you, is like you're very much centered around drawing. If I look at your website, look at your work, it's all sort of color pencil. It's all on like the same size paper, at least the series, like the most recent series of work the past few years. Like you really like strip away a lot of the excess and really focus on the purity of drawing. And I thought a cool place for us to begin is like, why? Like, what is it about drawing for you? And like, what are some of these choices? Like, where are they coming from in terms of your art practice?
Yeah, no, drawing is something that I mean, I feel like for me and for a lot of people, it's like how we get into art as children.
Mm-hmm.
And it started with like crayons and like pencils in school, some colored pencils, but like not too often. But as a kid, it's I was just like a compulsive doodler, drew everything. I was one of those kids who just had like every month like a new interest and like just fixated on something completely different. But I had like always, no matter what it was, I was drawing it like every day.
Mm,
In notebooks at home, like on the side of my notes, like going back probably to like first, second grade, I can really remember doing that a lot.
wow.
Um, yeah, and it's just that was just always like my thing. It was very natural. Um, as a kid, it just felt good. Like I loved shading. I remember in like second grade, I think I remember that moment where I first learned to like shade something
Hmm.
and just like it was like holy, like it just
Yeah.
changed everything.
Wow.
And it started with like me shading like Pokemon, and like I remember a babysitter of mine drawing Pokemon and me shading them in, and like just losing it, being like, this is the greatest thing ever. And I really, yeah, no, I really never stopped that
Wow.
ever. And then continue it, like I'm always doodling, always drawing. When I went to college, um, is kind of when I didn't go to an art school, but I went to like a liberal arts school, so I was able to take a class my freshman year called it was like from realism to abstraction, drawing from realism to abstraction,
Cool.
and that's where we did like charcoal drawings, and that was like kind of where I was like, oh, this feels really good. It
Mm,
just felt really natural, like what I've always been doing. Um, yeah, and I just realized then and there, like that was it for me. Like I love doing that. And we like just expressing yourself through drawing. And I remember it being like, here's like a crumpled piece of paper, and the assignment is just to make a large abstract drawing based on it. And that was kind of just, I had never experienced something like creating like a piece of fine art like that. It was always just like
yeah.
in the like edges of my notebooks.
Mm.
But yeah, and then I kind of continued through that. Switched to painting after I graduated. That's like a whole other story. It was using really thick amounts of paint. I guess that's like a whole other thing.
Yeah,
And
I'd love to
I
see the
was,
paintings just relative
yeah,
to the
no,
drawings. Interesting.
yeah, no, there's similarities, but they're pretty different. Um, and then so I was doing that. Um, for a lot of reasons, I like picked up painting. I enjoyed doing it, but it just didn't, I mean, it didn't really have the same feeling for me.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
and then in 2018, I started kind of drawing again, little graphite here and there. And then I remember like in my job I was working at, which was a concept store, which is like a big description. I can't explain it all right now, but we sold a lot of different things. And we
Hmm.
like, one time we were selling um, things around a concept of creativity. So we had like a little drawing station, mainly for kids, but
Hmm.
we had all these colored pencils out, and I just started like kind of playing with them there. And I was like, it was like that moment again where I was like,
Yeah.
like
It's
I,
like everything kind of looped back.
yeah, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I could do things I can't do with painting, and it was that feeling again. Um, and then I gradually just shifted back into colored pencils, slowly stopping painting.
Mm.
And then in 2020, when the pandemic started, um, I just completely stopped painting. I just really had no desire to get back into it once I started making big colored pencil drawings.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and I mean, the easiest way to describe it is it really is just like a feeling of,
Yeah.
it feels very natural for me going back all the way to childhood. I mean, like I'm a nail biter, and it like feels like biting nails, like shading, and it's like that physical kind of like release of
Yeah.
stress, and it's like very tied into that. It's just that feeling that I never got really from painting, where there was
Wow.
always kind of like a middleman there.
Yeah.
Yeah, drawing is like, it's just like very, it's to me, this is just like a personal thing, but it's like the ultimate way to make intuitive art is because it's
Mm.
like directly connected to your hands. It's like
Yeah.
it's just like going right in there. It's like you're like hooked up to it. Like it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah, for sure. You're like really plugged in. I love what you're
yeah,
saying
and
about
it
like the texture of it too, like the way it feels
mhm.
in your hand when you're rendering as well.
Yeah, no, it's all that texture, that feeling, the sound. And yeah, and then it's like so endless to I mean, I live in New York, so I have like a very small room in my apartment. I don't have a studio. It's like very convenient to just be able to fit everything under my bed.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's more cost efficient for me And yeah, it's just like something I can do on top of my bed. And I have a little desk which I can use at night. But yeah, it's like very personal, very at home. It's
Yeah.
like just it feels just like very connected to me.
Oh man, I
But
love that. I love the way
yeah,
how it like loops back to your childhood and like this connection to like the first sort of creative openings that are insights that kind of happened around, I think you said like second grade, like, when you first started shading and then how you like kind of went away from it and then it came back. And when it came back, man, it came back full force because what you're
yeah.
doing with those color pencils is just mind blowing. I mean, the imagery, the layering, the texture, the luminosity, the play with organic sort of forms, but sometimes geometric structures and symmetry, but then you blow it up and have a lot of asymmetry and dynamism in the compositions. There's just so much versatility in the way that you're using one particular medium, but it all is still so deeply connected to you. Like there's no mistaking looking at your drawings that they belong to you. The more I look at them, the more I just like want to dive into them. They just have like that, they have this like intimacy to it, which I think drawing can do not only through scale, but also because of, I guess, the familiarity with the material. Because I think everybody can understand what drawing is in some ways, where like not everybody can understand what like oil painting is because not everybody's had that experience. But anyone who's grown up in a decent childhood probably had someone put crayons or, color pencils in their hand at some point. So even if you're not an artist per se, we all have a relationship with that medium. But I'm just so kind of blown away by what you're doing with it. And I'm curious, like, where your inspiration for your imagery comes from, because I see a lot of like, I just have a lot of questions about it. I can see some inspiration from natural forms, but then I see this kind of otherworldly component to it and just draws me into them. So like, where does that come from for you?
Yeah, no, it's I guess mainly as far as like visual forms, it really does come from biology, and it's always kind of been there. Like even as a kid, I really into like drawing birds at a point. I like mixing and matching different biological elements. But yeah, so when I started getting back into drawing, I was more like looking directly at things.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of like inner biology. So I mean things like organs and like brains and veins. And I love right now like eyeballs. And there's this like photography of like that optometrists use to like photograph behind your eyeball, which is
Oh, wow.
really beautiful. I can't remember what it's called, but it's really beautiful. And that kind of is, I was looking at stuff like that when I started. A lot of like plant life, leaves I've used before, kind of directly pulled from veins of leaves, branches I'm always really into. But yeah, I've always been into the kind of like biological repetitious forms in biology.
Yeah.
So veins have always kind of stood out to be the most. And when I painted, I also kind of worked with those too. But recently, I haven't really been like looking at anything too specific.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of as the more I work on them, I'm just starting to like look back on the older drawings now. And so
Yeah.
even like the biologic forms, which I mean maybe like 2 years of looking at have now kind of just like dissolved into like drawings themselves. And it's like I'm never really looking at pictures of like anything anymore specifically, or like I'll like want to make a drawing that's like the feeling of like lungs and something
Uh-huh.
like that. But it's kind of yeah, it's like dissolved, and I've been really just like splicing drawings together at this point. It really does feel kind
Yeah.
of like a laboratory, very like experimental almost. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but it's really fun. I've always loved but just like microscopic imagery.
Yes. Yeah.
When I first started, that's if I do look at my artist compositions, I mean, I'd say they're more abstract, but like to look at them as something I like to think you're like almost looking through a microscope on
Mm-hmm.
something that is like one entire like living organism.
Yeah.
So it's not, I wouldn't say it's like a really like a specific place or scene or anything. But yeah, I've always been into like cells, especially, and like
Yeah.
organelles. But yeah, a lot of things in nature that are just already like abstract in themselves.
Yeah. these like interesting structures that are like
Yeah.
underneath the sort of like experience we have of things on the surface. Cause like with our eyes, like we can only see it at a certain scale. But of
Mhm.
course, with these tools, the microscopes, the telescopes, even like all the different tools
Yeah.
we've
Yeah.
invented, we can see things on different scales. And I think that's so fascinating. Like thinking about your work and hearing you speak, like I can totally see those relationships, but I can also totally see how what you're talking about in the newer work, how they're kind of like you're kind of extrapolating off of like what the old drawings were doing and kind of like exploring them more deeply, and then through that like you I guess more intuitive decision making can happen because you're not directly referencing anything anymore, but you're kind of still speaking to a similar kind of space and scale in relation to biological structures. I've always been so fascinated by that too,
Mhm.
because we see underneath like all this incredible like mirroring happening between, like you mentioned, like veins like in the body versus root systems underground versus like nebulas in the middle of the cosmos, like we see, or like Mississippi, the Mississippi Delta or river deltas, like from, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? It's like that to me is always so amazing, is this mirroring of forms happening at so many different levels of scale. And so it speaks to me about some bigger ideas related to like a structure, or even like a some kind of like unity or order to the chaos that seems to be implemented here on the planet. And
Yeah.
so to me, that's maybe why intuitively looking at your drawings, I feel so connected to them, because they're made from this in the same sort of like imagery or materials that I'm made from, that the earth is, that everything is a part of. Do you ever think about it like that, like this mirroring of like the grand, the micro, macro sort of like scales of life?
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's so I mean, there's something, it's very almost like it's something, I mean, it's almost like a self-portrait in a way, everything I'm doing, because it is
Mm-hmm.
like that. There's so many pieces of like, I mean, not just like, I mean, colors are a little different for that, but I mean, those are my own color choices. But yeah, like veins, especially like these like transparencies you see like in skin,
Mm-hmm.
and lots of different things. It's definitely, I want to use forms that people can recognize,
Yeah.
without having any knowledge in art at all, which is kind of
Yeah.
the goal for me. And or science even. It's like
Mm-hmm.
just going outside and looking like under your foot, seeing
Yeah.
something like
Mm.
I like that's kind of yeah, and I think it's inherently in everyone.
Yeah.
I mean you could, I don't know, go all the way back to like being in the womb and like
Yeah.
all those like veins and forms and that feeling. Maybe it
Yes.
starts there. It's like maybe it starts before that and like as a
Yeah.
single cell. It's like, but I definitely think there's something inherent in being a human, I mean, or an organism.
Yeah. Right.
And
A living
that, yeah, that connects
system.
us. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
no, and it's like seeing and things that like repeat in nature. It's like, it does. Like if you see like a slime mold or something, it like
Uh-huh.
kind of, it's very unsettling and like, it feels like something, it looks like something in you,
Yeah.
kind of. And same with veins and leaves and like, wings on bugs and
Yeah.
worms. It's just like it's all very like in us and around us. And you know, it's exactly that. I love that.
Yeah, it's amazing, it's amazing to be able to be in a position where you can so keenly observe reality as it's presented to you, especially in the natural forms that are happening. And now some may argue that everything that humans make is natural too, because it emerges from a natural process of the human being, so to speak.
Mhm.
But I guess to be more definitive, when I say like natural, I am speaking to like the systems that exist outside of the technological advances that we've made, the buildings we construct, the materials that we wear or that we utilize, like this computer right now we're looking
Mhm.
into. There's something so special about observing the natural world and these systems and forms that emerge from it. But I think to that note, what's really cool about your art is that your color palette does sort of like have a sense of creative license to it. Like you are speaking to some of these forms, but you are also having these color palettes that feel very fresh. They feel
Mhm.
very interesting. They kind of, I don't know, they kind of have this this sort of otherworldly sensation when I look at them, but yet knowing they're actually connected to this sort of world is to me an interesting tension, I guess, maybe, especially with some of the forms that are more like closely like obvious in terms of their relationship with like you're talking about like veins or like various structures of plants or what have you. So I find that to be super cool. Like, do you find your color palettes are always coming intuitively, or do you find like, do you observe the world and you're like, oh, I really like those colors, the way they look on that, I'm going to use them? Is it more conscious, or is it maybe a little of both?
It's kind of a little of both. I say it's mostly intuitive. Some of the ones I've done, like I'll be like, oh, I want to do like the idea of like floral flowers, or like I do like the idea of like a plant like
Mm.
entity almost. Like I love green and working with greens.
Hmm.
Um, and I will, because I mean they're just everywhere, plants, flowers, so it's just very easy to like be like, oh, like put those kind of colors together. But I mean, even and then again, like sometime like I'll use especially with like a kind of like a I don't like almost like raw meat looking type of color
Yeah,
scheme.
yeah,
I
like the
just I love,
marbling of like,
yeah, I
yeah,
just
mhm,
love that. It's like
yeah,
beautiful to me. Um, but recently again, even like kind of with the forms, the colors too have been definitely more intuitive.
yeah,
But I mean, I'll pull them from everywhere for sure, like in nature. But that's colors is also one of those things we were talking about that like it comes from man-made stuff too. And
hmm,
I'm very like I love futurism. I
hmm,
very much look to the future and the present as my main inspiration for everything I do. Um, and I am very interested in like technology.
hmm,
Um, music I listen to is very like ambient, kind of synthesizer, futuristic.
yeah.
I watch a lot of really like intensely colorful like shows from video games I used to play. Like if I knew, I mean, New York is great. If like there's so many wacky, crazy color combinations everywhere. And yeah, it's like the lights. I love. I love like glowing lights.
Yeah, I see a lot
Um,
of that luminous quality in
yeah,
your drawings,
I
which I'm really attracted to.
yeah, I love like glowingness. I love, I don't know how to put it, just like the combination of biology and man-made.
Mm,
Um, and it's like an interesting thing you were saying, like, yeah, it is. I do also like kind of believe that everything is natural in that way, but we do have to like kind of like understand that there is a point where
yeah,
where you like things can't bio like degrade things. But I just love that kind of like uncanny meshing of everything together and
yeah,
what's been
definitely.
made. And I think yeah, there is like a sense of like artificialness to the colors, especially I use, which I like.
Yeah,
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 but yeah, it's everything.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean that's it's so interesting, like how we have to like there is sort of a line like you that we have to sometimes be able to draw between like the natural forms and what's man-made, because I like to think of it like if humans didn't exist, like what would still be here? You know what I
Mm,
mean? Like if we weren't here making our tools and having our impact like we do on the planet, like what would still be around? Like those are
mm,
the things I would like label as more natural, I guess. But again, it's so debatable and it all depends on the context or the lens in which you look at it. But it makes sense to me, like you're thinking about like futurism a little bit and like
mm.
bright colors and even like some color combinations that might not typically be seen together. Like I'm looking at, like at that drawing like over your shoulder in the background, like
Yeah.
some of the way those like those those greens, the deep yellows like are going together. Like we see those together in nature all the time, but something about the way they're put together in
Mm.
that drawing gives it just another kind of quality. It almost like exaggerates nature to a point of like I don't know, like animation even, right? It's
Yeah,
like
definitely.
I don't know how to explain that more, but like, and that to me is what's so inviting about them too. I can see like the inspiration, like you were talking about, like certain video games you played or like really colorful shows and things like that, like being attracted to this kind of more highly saturated polychromatic kind of aesthetics that are coming into the work. But you do limit your palettes on certain pieces as well. So I just like the variety of what I see. Like it, like I was saying in the beginning, it's like you have such a distinct hand with the way you do things. And I think that's always an interesting and important thing to note when looking at artists' work is being able to see this sort of continuity of the artist in some way, especially someone who's working in more of a traditional media like drawing or painting, so to speak. And I think it just comes through so distinctly. I'm curious about like scale with your drawings. And I would imagine that like you were speaking like in New York, like you don't have a big studio, you got a smaller space. So working small, working with pencils like that is like a practical, thing you have to consider. But I'm curious like what your perspective is on scale in relation to these drawings, because I'd imagine that can make a huge difference in terms of the experience of the viewer for these kinds of works.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's the thing I think about a lot. Um, and it's one of the things I like about drawing is that compared to what I painted, which was like, how could I get bigger and bigger and bigger? And it's like I'm running out of room. It was like really stressful.
Yeah, it is. I
Like
know.
switching to drawing like relieved a lot of stress on me. And um, like I like making like a bigger drawing, which I mean a bigger drawing would be considered like a smaller painting, which is
Right.
another thing. Because it's so precise that it's like like a 18 by 24-inch drawing. It like when it's blank, it's just like feels so immense and
Yeah.
like holy, like what am I gonna do? When I started that, I was like, there's no way because like I mean a pencil tip is just so small and it's so
Yeah.
precise. Um, but I got comfortable doing that, and I that is definitely how I like to work in that kind of size. Like, I don't like I love like a portrait kind of. I like
Yeah.
and that's kind of where I like the classicness in of art history is in like
Yeah.
I tried working on like kind of like cut like I have like a cut paper drawing behind me. I've tried in the past working on more kind of contemporary shapes and it's just but I just love the like very classic like rectangular
Yeah.
portrait. Like to me it just like ties it all together in that
Yeah.
historical canon, I guess. Um,
Yes.
but I love that and I love um yeah, I love working in that size. Right now I'm doing 14 by 17, which it is kind of perfect right now for what I can do.
Yeah.
Um, because I'm still working full time. So I did in 2021 I worked on 18 by 24-inch drawings, which were so I was just getting into it. It took me so long.
Yeah.
And I just after I did 30 of them, which is a whole pad. And
Yeah.
after that, I was like, I can't do this unless I have more time because it was
Yeah.
just like I
Yeah.
can't be bending. Like they're all kind of incomplete when I look at them because I was just
Mm.
stressing out. It was like it's been 3 weeks. I'm halfway done. Like
Oh
next, like
man. Oh man. I know
so
that feeling sometimes. Yeah.
so I went smaller. The ones I'm working on now, which I've been working on since like the beginning of 2022, um, are to me it's like the perfect size. I can kind of
Yeah.
in 3 weeks, usually 3 to 4 weeks, just like make it completely finished and not worried about going back into it.
Yeah.
Um, but I also like I'm doing very small ones too. I mean, very small for me, which is 8 by 8.
Yeah.
Um, which is that's like great practice. I only recently this earlier this year started kind of consistently working on two sizes at once,
Yeah.
um, which has helped me a lot, especially in what I do. But one thing I also like to do is always just go through a pad of paper from like
Yeah.
start to finish. Because I use like I use like the imprints on them. So
Yeah.
below each pad, it's like it constantly is kind of like transferring down. But
Oh,
also it,
interesting.
yeah, yeah. So it's like it kind of the whole. I kind of think of each pad of paper as like a whole piece in general, and it's like
Wow. I love
so
that.
it's kind of like a year to 2 year long thing I'm working on
Wow.
almost.
Y-
Or it's like I was kind of telling someone it's like a calendar almost, or like a diary,
Yeah.
or just like
Yes.
it's that's what I like about drawing too. It's like it's like never ending to me. It's just constantly like flowing and it's like coming
Hmm.
directly out of you. But I love doing that. And I've only really worked that way since I started drawing, just going through entire
Yeah.
pads of paper like that. And so right now I'm about like halfway done. So I was just like, yeah, I'm just gonna keep doing that until I reach
Until
the
the
end.
pad of paper is
Yeah, and
done.
be like, well, if I have more time when I reach the end, maybe I'll go bigger, maybe I'll go
Yeah.
smaller. But Yeah, that's it's like a great way. It takes a lot of pressure off me too to like
Yeah.
think of if I need to like do this or do sizes. I'm just like because it takes a
Yeah,
long
keep
time,
it
but
simple, like
yeah,
you're not even titling them either, like
yeah,
minimal information, like it's just
definitely.
kind of purely about like the image. But I love that. I didn't realize that, but it makes sense now, like looking at how even just your website's organized in these like kind of two distinct periods of time, and they're
Mhm.
all the exact same size.
Yeah.
The works that you're doing. And I love like how you're saying it's like almost like a calendar, or it's like each like grouping of drawings is really like one work of art. It's really kind of like a record of time, and how each one that you do passes down to the next. So do you
Mhm.
see that in like the scoring of the paper and stuff like underneath it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that's
Yes.
so
Yeah.
interesting. I guess like
Yeah.
because
And
it's
some of
hard on
them.
the computer, like I can
Mhm.
see some of that, but like I can't really tell unless you see them in person. But I would really be fascinated to see like how that presents itself in the 3D land.
Yeah, no, it does that, and it's like totally depends sometimes. Like, and that's what I love about the pencils I use too, is they're really tough. So I'll like dig into it, sometimes like rip through it. But
Wow.
they could leave marks for like four drawings or have like if you look closely at it
Yeah.
is to me, it's like a natural. It is. I mean, it's literally a natural process. It's
Yes.
like a fossil. I think it looks and is like a fossil kind of. It's like
Hmm.
an imprint.
Like a record.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, or it's like erosion almost.
Mm.
But it adds to that kind of process, natural process, physicality to it.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm very rough with them. Usually, I like that about
Yeah.
them. I don't I don't worry about smudging it. I'll like rub my hand all over it.
Mm.
Accidentally smudge things all the time. The corners do get bent out of shape, and I'll like draw on the page after it. So like if I'm like shading on the edge of one, there'll be like a giant blue smudge on the next page already. So I just have
Oh,
to work
wow.
with
It gives
that.
you something to work with and start.
Yeah, no. So
Oh, cool.
it keeps it kind of exciting and surprising for me. But yeah, it's like it does. It makes it add to that like unpredictable naturalness of it,
Yes,
that like
definitely.
imperfection of it all, which I love.
Yes, I love that too, because there's definitely an incredible amount of skill that goes into what you're doing, the way that you're shading, like, the quality of value and depth and texture that you're creating, the blending that happens with some of the colors in certain areas. I mean, it's definitely like you can look at them and just see like the refinement in what you're doing. And I just think that the way that now thinking about them as like one work of art, like a calendar or like a series, from each pad, is really interesting to me. Just that idea of like passing down, like one drawing goes into the next, which goes next in a literal sense, like they're impacting each other. Like, so I know, like you mentioned, like sometimes I'll have smudges on it, and that'll already be and obviously scoring on the next sheet of paper. But like, what's sort of your way of getting started? Do you have like a certain like ritual in the studio? Like, how do you like get into that sort of flow state when you're working on your art? Are you able to just jump right into it, or do you have like your own sort of like way in which you enter the studio and you begin to work on a drawing?
It's really, I mean, most of it is a kind of just jump right into the flow state, except for like the first day or 2 days in it,
Yeah.
where and that could be like the only like stressful time really, because after that it's just like slowly building up layers and making lots of like tiny marks usually that I don't have to worry about because I always kind of like I'm going to end up going over them anyway.
Yeah.
Um, but when I first started drawing, that's kind of the only time there's any like real and like sometimes I'll just be that's when I'm like sitting there for sometimes like an hour just kind of like staring at it and like but those I kind of I always I since starting I haven't not had an idea like going into one yet and like I
Yeah.
always think of an idea while I'm working on the previous one.
Yeah.
um and now and it's that's just kind of getting easier and easier the more drawings I make
Yeah.
because it's just like there's more and more to like reference material now. And it's like I'm saying, like
Yes.
I'm looking less at like actual pictures of like organisms and biology and look and just going into like the sketchbook.
Yeah,
Um,
you're creating your own language
yeah,
essentially in
yeah,
drawing, and so you can pull
yeah,
from
like
that.
yeah, no, but it's and I'll just be like, oh, I'll look something I made like 2 years ago, and I'm like, ugh, like like what would happen if I did this now? Like, or if I
Yeah.
just like this one little like corner, or if like I brought this and like this
Mm.
other corner from another drawing, and it's just lots of it's really fun. Like
Yeah.
it feels like a little laboratory. It's like silly, but
No, I
like
love that. I love the way that you describe that. And I think about that too, like especially at certain stages in my studio practice, like you go around, there's like so many, things sometimes that you're working on. Like you're working on printmaking, a drawing, and then a painting or whatever. This is just like my experience, because I tend to like, I
hmm,
really love painting. But I do drawing, and I do like explore some other materials. But in a sense, I do think of it similarly. It is kind of like a laboratory. It's a place to like experiment and discover and to learn not only like about like your own process as an artist, but really for me, art seems to be a real teaching and understanding myself on the deepest levels of who I
hmm,
am. You know what I mean?
yeah.
It's like I feel like my art practice for me is a vehicle for developing a greater sense of wisdom or knowledge about like who I am in relation to all the things that are happening around me. And it's been such a beautiful journey so far because I feel like it's a never ending lesson that's happening. And I feel like kind of what you're saying in terms of your laboratory, like once as you've developed all these drawings over the past few years, several years, now you almost have like a never ending well of inspiration to pull from to continue to make
Yeah.
more of them, and that's a really, I think, exciting place to be as an artist because now in your mind you can really feel and experience infinite possibilities of where you can go and what you can do with what it is you've discovered about your own process as an artist. So I think that's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's exactly it feels like that. Like it's just like infinite. It's like the infinite universes, and it's like there's always something I didn't catch, or it's like by the time I like run out of an idea, it's just like there's already a new one. So
Yeah.
it is really fun. And that's the thing, like colored pencils, it's like them just being so tiny and precise that it's like there's just so much you could do. And it's yeah, it's I feel like there's just like a crazy, just like experimental quality to colored pencils.
Yeah.
The way you could like different textures you can get with them and how you hold
Yeah.
them. You can, like oh, it's just yeah, there's just endless to me at
And
this
even
point.
when you combine, like depending on what kind of paper you use, like even the
Mm,
type of paper you use in relationship with those pencils will yield different kinds of textures or marks or qualities
mm,
too. So, but that's there is like it's so funny. It's like you have this sort of this limitation of like the material, but within it's so kind of like paradoxical because like within the limitation of the material is infinite possibility. You know what
yeah.
I mean? And like I find that to be like so fascinating to think about as well as like as artists is when we focus on certain media and we really invest our time in it like and that's all we do for a long time we realize that like within this limitation quote unquote of the material there is just so much that can be done.
Mhm.
So I think that's like such an interesting lesson like for life. Like it doesn't need to be like carte blanche, have everything you want anytime you want what you want. Like sometimes just
Yeah.
picking one thing and diving as deep as you can is everything. I remember like this there's this I guess it's a parable, but it's about like digging for wisdom or knowledge. It's like I'm going to butcher it, but essentially the parable goes like, don't go around digging a bunch of shallow wells. Just pick one place and
Yeah.
just go until you hit water,
Yeah, I
and
love that.
like
Yeah,
sometimes you have to have
exactly.
the faith of just pick one spot and just go until you hit the water. And
Yeah.
it seems like that's what you're doing in a lot of ways. And I'm so inspired by it. And I just love to see like how it will continue to evolve for you. Do you have an
Yeah, no, me
idea of
too.
like, because you said you're about halfway through this pad of paper that you're working
Mm.
on, and then you got the 8x8s that you're doing. I'd be curious to see like, how as you move through these two different pads, like where your scale goes from there. Do you have any inkling of like where it might go, or are you just kind of letting space be there and the time will
Yeah.
come sort of thing?
Right now it's more that very much like I live like one drawing at a time, and like I
Yeah.
really only think of the next one. And I mean that also has to do with me having like no pressure from the art world to make anything. Like I
Yeah.
really am just me making what I want.
Yeah.
I just, just me in my room. I don't really do much. It's like,
Yeah.
so it's like, I mean, I like curse it a lot and I'm like, I
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
frustrated. I'm like, why
For
can't I be in
sure.
more shows? Why can't I be
Yeah.
everywhere? But like, it's like, I do have a lot of freedom, which like I need to be grateful for. I think that like,
Definitely do.
nobody's putting any pressure on me to do anything, which is nice as
Yeah,
an artist.
man.
I think it's good as an artist to have that, I think. But yeah, I mean, right now I'm like just think it all does have depends on where I am. I because last time I made those bigger ones in 2021, I was like still working 40 hours a week. But I love that size and I react so differently, like composition
Yeah.
to this, even like a little change in the size of the shape of the paper will like totally affect everything I make.
Yeah.
And I would love to, now that I've had a couple of years, I'd love to get back into that and see how I could like make one of those to just like full completion. Like,
Hmm.
but I mean, that all depends too. So right now, I mean, depending how much time I have, I could end up just buying another sheet of the same size I'm making now.
Yeah.
I do love the 8x8 ones. I love square compositions,
Yeah.
especially for like abstracted work. I think it
Yeah.
made it work pretty well. So I'm probably, I mean, those I feel like I just could do for the rest of my life. And
That's
just whatever
awesome.
I'm also doing, they're super fun. They're like kind of playing cards to me. They feel
Yeah.
like, and it's like,
That's
I mean,
all.
that's like as a kid, it's like I was so into like Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh and all that. And I always think
Yeah.
about that
Yeah.
when I'm making those little ones. Like they're just these like unpredictable, different but connected playing cards. So I might never stop with those, but bigger ones, like I would like to go a little bigger.
Yeah.
Most paper that you can buy in a store is like 18 by 24, which is the biggest I've worked on.
Yeah.
I would like to spend like, I mean, sometime like getting back into that, but it really all depends because like I don't think I can. It's like that thing where I'm like making one drawing per like month and a half. It's like I don't know if like I'm ready to do that right now.
Yeah, it's a
Just
lot, when you think about
yeah.
changing that scale, especially because, you have to, you're not spending all day every day drawing. And so you want to continue to feel like progress, like you're
Mhm.
continuing to move forward and create more and more of these. But it would be interesting to see like a dramatic shift in scale, what it would be like to work at like a 20 by 30 size. And
Mm.
like, even if you
Yeah.
just work on like one of those a year, like you just do one big one a year while you're
Yeah.
working on the small ones, and it's just literally a year-long drawing that you just keep coming back to. It'd just be an interesting way to create maybe a relationship between the smaller practices. But really, I don't think it doesn't. What it needs is what's going to allow you to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's the most important thing. It's like we don't want to, as artists, I feel like, overthink our decisions about like scale or media. Like trust your intuition and like what's going to allow you to enter the work and actually produce what it is you want to produce, create, and be in that process that you want to be like implementing. But sometimes, like, we all get bored. And so
Yeah.
sometimes the simplest thing to do is just challenge yourself with a new scale or a new material. Like I'd be curious to see, because I know you love the colored pencils, and I can appreciate like the precision, but I'm also imagining like how small do you let those pencils get before you toss them? Like
Pretty small.
you like pinching
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
But like,
No,
what would
that's
it
the
be
yeah.
like if you were working with pastels? Like, how would
Yeah.
the marks change? How would the texture change? And maybe that's not something you actually even need to do at all. It's just an open question. But yeah, it is interesting, like as artists, how we get really connected to certain materials, and especially for certain periods of time or phases in our life. But yeah, how small do you let them get? Like they're like little
Oh,
nubs.
very small. I mean, I have like
Let me
we're
see.
like this size, like right here,
Oh
but
shit.
usually get small. I would, that's like the pencil extender is like the
Oh,
greatest tool
oh.
for any drawer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it saved my life. I go through so many of them.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, I don't know if you could tell from my drawings, like I have almost zero organization with my pencils, and it's just and I've woken up with like fully sharpened pencils under me. Like it's not good. Like I'm getting a little better, but I
Yeah.
kind of am just like, even when I'm starting a drawing, I'll be like just like picking up things in my room, like looking under my bed, and like I
Yeah.
swear I have one of these somewhere, and I'll find it like behind my radiator or
That's
something. Like it's
hilarious.
just
Oh my
yeah.
God.
But
What
they're
kind of
everywhere, and
what kind of
yeah,
color pencils are you using?
they're like Faber Castell,
Hmm.
so they're like a really like sturdy kind of
Yeah.
thick pencil, which is good because like they do break. So I mean, I really push hard on them a lot,
Yeah.
especially at the beginning. Um, as long as they break it, it makes a cool effect. But they're just like usually they're pretty hard to break, which is nice. They
Yeah, for
last a very
sure.
long time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really cool. Yeah, because I mean the quality of the color in your work is so rich, you know. It's like
Mhm.
you get some really amazing vibrancy out of those color pencils. So I was just curious, like what kind of brand you use or what style of like color pencil. The pencil
Mhm.
hole, I forgot about the pencil holders having those. That
Yeah.
makes perfect sense. Because like I sometimes have pencils, especially when I do like large graphite drawings, and I will
Mhm.
wear those pencils down to like the tiniest bit. But I never thought to
Yeah,
get just
yeah.
a little a pencil holder to
Oh,
use
it
it. I'm gonna
changes
get one.
everything.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
gonna do that because I just toss them, or sometimes I'll like keep
Yeah.
them around because they're kind of funny, like that
I
you've
do
been
collect
like
them,
wearing
yeah.
them around. Yeah, because they all are these like kind of relics of
Yeah.
your process. And I think that's always kind of really cool too, is to think about like what's left behind after a drawing is completed
Mhm.
or after a painting is done or a sculpture or whatever it is you're doing. Like the remnants of the process is always like kind of interesting to me whenever I like go to an artist studio. Like of course I'm interested in the work, but I'm also just
Mhm.
interested in like the materials, like how they're handling the materials and like what's left behind and
Yeah.
all of that. You kind of get insight into how an artist works, and I think everyone kind of finds their own way of doing things, and it's kind of, for me, it's really fascinating, like the rituals around a studio or the lack of ritual around the studio practice. And it seems like what you were saying, like you can just kind of dive right in, especially if you've already been kind of engaged in the drawing for a couple days. You already kind of know where you're at. You kind of just can enter that flow space, and it's such a special state of mind to be in. Do you have any other like parts of your life that you feel like you have a similar type of experience aside from drawing, in terms of like that mental freedom, that kind of flow space that we're speaking to?
I mean, not I mean, not really at the moment. I'm trying to like, I mean, it's like really like all I do outside of work is like draw. And it's like, I mean, I'm definitely not in that flow state, like, but I'm like talking to customers and stuff. But
Yeah.
but it's like very, it is very unique to drawing because even when I was painting, it was like very, I used like very thick textural paintings. I would make like entire painting out of like 10 brush strokes,
Oh wow.
and it was like stuff like that. So I never, and it was very constructed and very like
Hmm.
goes the motions. Drawing it, yeah, it's like it's a it's unique. Um, and there isn't really anything like, even as like when I was younger and in middle school, high school, my thing was like music. I played trombone.
Oh, cool.
Um, yeah, and music was everything, but like even that was very going through like learning scales and like knowing, but
Hmm.
that was kind of intuitive at a point, but it's not it's like so
Yeah.
intuitive in a way that nothing else
Well,
ever
that's why
has.
you draw, right? Like that's
Yeah,
probably
exactly.
why you're drawn to painting. I mean, drawing and painting and making art. Like that's probably what in your life drew you to making art, because it was sort of maybe opening those experiences in your mind. Do you ever feel it like when you're like observing nature? Like, do you ever go like through Central Park or like get outside of the city, and like do you have the similar kind of flow experience like when you're observing like the natural world?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's like you bring up exactly.
Yeah.
That's it's different than drawing, but it is definitely. I'm especially really into birds. That's
Hmm.
like one of my greatest life hobbies is
So
bird and
cool.
bird watching. Ever
Yeah.
since I was like, I probably in middle school, I like tore through my dad's like Sibley Guide to Birds and like knew how to recognize like every bird in my backyard.
That's
Um,
awesome.
and, and I still do that. I still love them, and if I that's like always it is like always my head's always like looking for birds, like even like
Yeah.
pigeons. I'm like, what are they doing? Um, like sparrows. But yeah, I'll go to Central Park, especially like I remember I went to the vet and then to Central Park after, and it was like late spring, so it was like or it was like migration season, and it
Yeah.
did kind of feel like that, where I was just like darting around looking for like warblers and things. It was so much. It was like the most fun I've had like
Oh
outside of
man.
drawing.
I love that too. I live in like Southeast Louisiana, and
Mm.
like the birds that we have down here, the wildlife, especially when you get to certain parts of this region, are just unbelievable. Like the blue herons are like majestic
Oh
to
yeah.
me. We have sometimes like white like cranes that will land in our backyard. We have like a little like water, like basically like a little fountain of water back there, and like birds will just pop in there and drink. And like observing from like the back of my house.
Yeah,
I love
yeah.
to do that too because I love to see like the patterns and rhythms of what birds are coming and when, and certain times of the year, especially down here, we see just a lot of the migratory patterns of them going south and north through these areas because there's so much water here, and it's pretty, year round. It's pretty temperate. It doesn't get super cold very often. So I definitely can relate to that. I think they're such majestic beings. I love watching them soar in the sky. I love watching them like land. You know what I mean? Where they
Mm,
do like this
yeah.
very little wave patterns, like in their wings, like when they land, like all those things. And I always try to point them out to like my son, like all the different birds that are around. We always pick up feathers. So kindred spirit in that way. I can't say
Yeah,
I know
I
all the
love that.
species, but I know a lot of them that are around here. We have these like little egrets down here that are so like cool looking. They got this like long beaks that are curved, kind of like Thoth, the Egyptian
Mm,
god Thoth, that are just so cool. They just like peck around on the ground all the
okay.
time.
So
Um,
jealous.
I
Yeah.
know it's super cool. Especially the wetlands, the kind of birds that you
Mhm.
see around here. But yeah, I mean, nature is such an incredible access point for us to enter those spaces too. But I think, in a lot of ways, like the way, living in New York, or even just the urban sort of reality that we've created in our culture, it's sometimes, unless you're very deliberate about connecting with the natural world, it can be so easy to gloss over.
Mhm.
And so I think that's such, and especially your art is all coming from like components of that, even on like the microscopic level. I think it's super cool that like that's like another space for you to get in that sort of state of mind, that state of just presence. I feel like flow state is really just like extreme presence,
Mm,
extreme
definitely.
connection. That's why like time falls away. That's why like it just feels like you can be in that space forever because time just becomes not a factor. And I think as artists, we all love that feeling. I personally love that feeling and trying to cultivate ability to tap in as often as I can. But when I'm painting, it's just, especially when you're in the middle of a work, I totally relate to you. Like after a few days, like you're in it, it's like all I
Yeah.
can think about, all I want to go back to sometimes is
Mm.
just getting back into that space. But I think what you're creating in your apartment, your studio, the drawings you're doing are so powerful. They're so energetic. They're so interesting and varied, and there's such a distinction to them that is all you. And so I'm just super grateful that I came across them, and thank you for
Thank you.
taking time. And we're coming up on an hour, like taking time to connect with me on this podcast so we can, have this conversation, which is really just another beautiful one. So I really appreciate you. And everybody out there who's listening, you have to check out Dan's work. All the links will be in the show notes. Definitely give him a follow on Instagram and see all the incredible work that he's producing with these pads of paper. So I can't wait to see where it goes, man.
Hey, yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah,
It's meant
for
a lot to
sure.
talk to you. Yeah, no, I was saying I don't get to talk very often about this, so
Yes, I
it
know.
means a
That's
lot.
that's why I made this thing, because I could talk about this stuff all day, and it's
Yeah.
like, so it just feels natural for me to like engage these kinds of conversations. And the best privilege of it all is I get to meet other artists like yourself and create these connections and build this sense of some kind of community or camaraderie or just like support, because I think as artists, that's what we need to do more than ever is support each other. And because art is so important for our culture. And I think it always leads the way towards something great, especially when artists are united. So yeah, well, thank you, man. I'll let you go on with your weekend. Appreciate you so much. And we'll talk soon. Okay.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Peace.
Bye.
Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of Concerning the Spiritual and Art. If you like what we're doing here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you can stay in touch and in tune with all the amazing offerings that we're going to be bringing to this channel. Thanks again for all your support. Super grateful, and excited to bring more content your way. Peace, y'all.